The silver orb of Nexus's second moon painted Kira's chambers in ghostly light as she stood motionless before the ceremonial armor laid across her bed. Its polished emerald plates, inlaid with the sacred symbols of House Talavir, mocked her with their beauty, beauty that would soon chain her to a monster. "Mother, please don't do this," Ilara whispered from the doorway, her slender form silhouetted against the corridor's amber glow. At 12 cycles, her daughter's crest had just begun to form the distinctive ridges that marked Viridian nobility. Father wouldn't want this. Kira's heart clenched at the mention of Marin. Her husband, her true husband, had been dead barely a solar cycle, his body still cooling when the Council had proposed her union with Commander Dravik to secure the Centauri alliance. "The decision isn't mine to make, little one," Kira replied, though the words tasted false even as she spoke them. She gestured for Ilara to approach and gently ran her 4 fingers through her daughter's dark hair. "Our bloodlines are too valuable to remain unpaired. I've seen how he looks at you," Ilara said, violet eyes welling with tears. "And I've heard what he did on Proxima. The villages he burned, the family separated." Kira couldn't deny it. Dravik's reputation for brutality was well earned. Even now, his warriors patrolled the corridors of their ancestral home, honor guards that served as both escort and jailer. A soft chime announced the arrival of First Minister Valen, her father's oldest friend and the only council member who still looked at her with something resembling compassion. "The ceremonial preparations begin in 1 hour," he said, his ancient face solemn. "Commander Dravik has requested a private audience before the rites." Kira suppressed a shudder. "Tell him I am deep in meditation, as tradition demands." Valen hesitated. He was most insistent. "And I am still matriarch of House Talavir," she replied, steel entering her voice. "At least until tomorrow's bonding." After Valen departed, Kira moved swiftly to the concealed panel behind her meditation altar. The small space contained everything she had managed to gather: nutrient packs, weatherproof cloaks, identity chips with falsified lineages, and a modest cache of trade crystals. "Mother," Ilara's voice trembled with uncertainty. "Pack only what you can carry. Nothing identifiable." Kira pulled her daughter close. "We leave during the purification hour, when all eyes will be on the ceremonial flames." "But the borders are washed." "Yes, but your father taught me more than just courtly manners." Kira allowed herself a small, sad smile. "There's a supply route through the northern ridge. Marin showed me once, in case Centauri negotiations failed." As they worked in silence, Kira caught her reflection in the polished surface of her armor. The elegant crest that marked her as pure-blooded nobility seemed to diminish in the dim light, just another burden to bear. By tomorrow, that crest would be bound to Dravik's. Their bloodlines merged in service to an alliance built on fear rather than respect. "I won't let him touch you," she whispered, more to herself than to Ilara. "And I won't let him reshape you in his image." Dawn would bring either their freedom or their final surrender to tradition. And Kira had already surrendered far too much. The ceremonial cleansing chambers provided the perfect cover for their escape, while attendants prepared the sacred oils and incense for Kira's purification ritual. She and Ilara slipped through the servant passages that honeycombed the ancient Talavir estate. Kira had exchanged her ornate pre-wedding attire for practical travel garments, her distinctive crest concealed beneath a hooded cloak. "Hold my hand and don't look back," Kira whispered as they reached the compound's agricultural sector. The massive hydroponic gardens fed the estate and provided the perfect camouflage as they moved between towering rows of nutrient-rich vegetation. Ilara clutched her mother's hand, eyes wide but determined. "Will they follow us beyond the ridge?" "Dravik will never stop hunting what he believes is his," Kira replied honestly. She refused to lie to her daughter, even to comfort her. But the northern territories border human settlements. Viridian law restricts military movement there to avoid diplomatic incidents. They reached the maintenance access that led to the outer fields. Kira entered the override code Marin had entrusted her with before his death. The door hissed open, revealing the wild landscape of Nexus stretching toward the distant mountains. For the first time in months, Kira felt the unfiltered wind against her skin. No recycled air, no ceremonial incense, just the raw, untamed scent of freedom. "We have until the purification hour ends," she said, calculating the distance to the ridge. "Approximately 3 hours before they realize I'm not meditating in seclusion." Their progress was steady but cautious as they navigated the increasingly rugged terrain. The twin suns of the Nexus system beat down mercilessly, the temperature rising as morning gave way to midday. Ilara maintained a brave silence despite the grueling pace, her young legs struggling with the steep incline as they approached the ridge. "Look," Kira pointed to a distinctive rock formation. "Your father's marker. The passage is just beyond." The narrow trail was barely visible, intentionally disguised to appear as nothing more than a natural fissure in the mountainside. As they started their ascent, the distant sound of engines shattered the silence. "Military transports," Kira hissed, recognizing the distinctive whine. "They've discovered our absence sooner than expected." Fear propelled them forward, scrambling up the hidden path as the sound of pursuit grew louder. The jagged rocks tore at their clothing and skin, but neither dared slow their pace. Kira's muscles burned with effort as she half-carried Ilara up the steepest sections. "There," Ilara pointed to a narrow opening in the rock face. "Is that it?" Kira nodded, relief washing over her as they squeezed through the passage. The tunnel beyond was tight but navigable, leading them through the heart of the ridge toward the northern territories. Hours passed in darkness, their progress guided only by the small illumination device Kira had packed. When they finally emerged on the other side, twilight had descended across the landscape. The distant lights of a human settlement glimmered on the horizon, tantalizingly close yet separated by a final stretch of open terrain. "We'll rest here briefly," Kira decided, finding shelter in a small grove of twisted vegetation. She distributed water and nutrient packs, watching as Ilara consumed hers with exhausted gratitude. "Is Commander Dravik behind us?" Ilara asked between bites. "Not yet. His traditional warriors would struggle with the passage we just used." Kira checked the small scanner she'd brought. "But they'll circle around eventually. We need to reach the human settlement by morning." As they prepared to continue their journey, a sudden sharp pain lanced through Kira's side. She stumbled, hand automatically covering the wound she'd been concealing since their difficult climb. "Mother." Ilara's voice rose in panic as she noticed the dark fluid seeping between Kira's fingers. "It's nothing. Just a scratch from the rocks." But the world was already beginning to tilt sideways, colors bleeding together as shock set in. Kira forced herself upright, each step now an exercise in pure will. "We continue. We have to reach the humans before dawn." The final kilometers became a blur of pain and determination. Kira's strength ebbed with each step, her body temperature dropping dangerously as blood loss took its toll. Dawn was breaking when they finally reached the outskirts of the human settlement, a collection of sturdy structures surrounded by cultivated fields. Kira's legs finally gave way at the edge of a tilled field. As consciousness faded, she pulled Ilara close, shielding her daughter with her body one final time. "If I don't wake," she whispered, "find someone with kind eyes." The last thing Kira saw before darkness claimed her was a tall figure approaching through the morning mist, silhouetted against the rising sun. The first thing Kira noticed as consciousness returned was the unfamiliar scent, earthy and organic, lacking the sterile precision of Viridian dwellings. Pain throbbed in her side, but it was dulled, managed. She forced her heavy eyelids open to find herself on a bed in a simple room constructed of natural materials. Sunlight streamed through cloth-covered windows, casting warm patterns across worn floorboards. "Mother," Ilara's voice came from beside her. Her daughter's face appeared, eyes rimmed with exhaustion but alive with relief. "Where?" Kira's throat felt raw, her voice barely a whisper. "You're in my home," came a deep voice from the doorway. "About 20 kilometers inside human territory." The human who entered was tall and broad-shouldered, with skin weathered by sun and wind. His hair was the color of fertile soil, and his eyes, a striking blue, watched her with cautious concern. He carried a tray with what appeared to be medical supplies. "I'm Thomas Aldridge," he said, approaching slowly as if concerned about startling her. "Found you both collapsed at the edge of my eastern field 3 days ago." 3 days. Kira attempted to sit up, but pain lanced through her side. "Easy," Thomas cautioned, setting down the tray. "You had a nasty wound. Infection was setting in. I've treated it, but you'll need time to heal." Ilara clutched her mother's hand. "He helped us, Mother. He carried you here and made the bad color go away from your wound." Kira studied the human with wary gratitude. "You know what we are." It wasn't a question. Their physical differences from humans were subtle but unmistakable. The slightly purple-tinged complexion, the small ridges along their hairlines that would eventually form full crests in adulthood. "Viridians," Thomas nodded. "And based on those crests and the quality of your clothing, not ordinary ones." He began changing the dressing on her wound with practiced efficiency. Military training includes xenobiology basics. Served 8 years in the frontier defense before settling here. Kira winced, both from his touch and his words. "Then you know harboring us could cause difficulties with my people." Thomas's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. "Wouldn't be my first diplomatic incident." His hands were surprisingly gentle for their size. "Your daughter wouldn't tell me why you were running. Said that was your story to share or keep." Pride warmed Kira's chest as she glanced at Ilara, who had maintained her composure and discretion even when alone with a stranger. She was right to be cautious. "Smart kid," Thomas agreed. "Reminds me of my sister at that age." He finished securing the fresh bandage. "There's food when you're ready. Nothing fancy, but it's compatible with Viridian digestion." After he left the room, Kira pulled Ilara close, inhaling the familiar scent of her daughter's hair. "Tell me everything." Ilara described how Thomas had found them at dawn, carried Kira to his transport vehicle, and brought them to his isolated homestead. He'd used a combination of human medicines and traditional remedies to treat Kira's wound, which had been deeper than she'd admitted. "He has pictures of himself in a uniform," Ilara added, "and sometimes he talks to the land before planting seeds." Talks to the land. He says thank you to it. For growing food. Ilara's expression grew thoughtful. "He's not like the humans the council describes." Later, when Kira felt strong enough to leave the bed, Thomas showed them around his home, a spacious dwelling constructed primarily of local timber and stone. The property included several cultivated fields, a greenhouse filled with experimental crops, and a barn housing equipment and animals Kira couldn't identify. "It's not much," Thomas said as they stood on his porch watching the sunset paint the sky in spectacular hues. "But it's mine. Paid for with 8 years of following orders I sometimes questioned." Kira recognized the shadow that briefly crossed his face, the same one she'd seen in Meron's eyes when he returned from diplomatic missions that had required compromise. "You've risked much for strangers," she said quietly. Thomas shrugged. "Way I see it, a woman and child in trouble look the same in any species." He handed her a mug of steaming liquid that smelled surprisingly pleasant. "Besides, your daughter explained you were running from a bad man. That's all I needed to know." As darkness fell, Ilara's eyelids grew heavy. Thomas showed them to a second bedroom he'd prepared, with fresh linens and pillows arranged in a nest-like configuration that approximated traditional Viridian sleeping arrangements. "How did you know?" Kira gestured to the bedding. "Asked Ilara what would make you both comfortable." His expression softened as he looked at the half-asleep child. Kids are usually honest about the simple things. After Ilara had fallen asleep, Kira found Thomas outside on the porch, staring at the stars. He didn't seem surprised when she joined him. "They'll come looking eventually," he said without preamble. "Whoever you're running from." Kira didn't deny it. "You should know the truth before that happens, so you can decide if we should leave." As night deepened around them, she told him about the forced marriage, about Dravik's reputation for cruelty, about the political alliance that would have sacrificed her autonomy and potentially her daughter's future. Thomas listened without interruption, his face growing increasingly grim. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment before speaking. "My home has stood against 3 hurricanes and a forest fire," he finally said. "It can withstand whatever storm follows you." His eyes met hers, steady and resolute. "You can stay as long as you need." For the first time since Miran's death, Kiera felt the weight on her shoulders lighten, if only a fraction. In this strange human's eyes, she saw something she hadn't dared hope for: safety. 3 weeks passed with no sign of pursuit, allowing a tentative rhythm to develop in their shared lives. Kiera's wound healed steadily under Thomas's care, the angry purple scar fading to a silvery line across her ribs. With each passing day, the rigid formality that had defined her Viridian existence softened in the presence of the human's straightforward nature. Ilara blossomed in this new environment, her natural curiosity finding fertile ground in Thomas's seemingly endless patience. He taught her about earth plants that could survive in Nexus soil, showed her how to collect eggs from the peculiar feathered creatures he called chickens, and answered her countless questions about human customs with thoughtful consideration. "Your daughter has a scientist's mind," Thomas observed one evening as they watched Ilara carefully documenting the growth patterns of seedlings in the greenhouse. "Reminds me of researchers I escorted during border surveys." On Viridia, she would be directed toward diplomatic service, Kira replied. "Noble bloodlines aren't permitted academic freedoms until after their 3rd century." Thomas shook his head, a gesture Kira had come to recognize as disapproval. "Seems a waste of potential." "Many aspects of Viridian society would seem wasteful to outsiders," she acknowledged. "The price of 10,000 years of tradition." As Kiera regained her strength, she insisted on contributing to the household. She learned the operation of agricultural equipment with unexpected ease, applying the same precision that had once guided her through ceremonial court dances to the cultivation of Thomas's fields. "You're a quick study," Thomas remarked one afternoon, watching as she calibrated the irrigation system. "Took me months to get that sequence right." Matriarchs are expected to master any skill necessary for maintaining the household's standing, she explained, her fingers moving deftly across the control panel. "Though I admit, this is more satisfying than memorizing ancestral lineages." The physical distance between them diminished gradually, almost imperceptibly, a hand steadying her elbow when terrain was uneven, fingers brushing while passing tools, the warmth of his shoulder against hers during cool evenings on the porch. Kira found herself studying him when he wasn't looking, the way sunlight caught in his hair, how his hands moved with purpose yet gentleness, the lines that appeared at the corners of his eyes when he smiled. Things she had no cultural framework to interpret, yet felt drawn to nonetheless. One night, after Ilara had gone to bed, Thomas opened a bottle of amber liquid and offered her a glass. "Whiskey," he explained. "Traditional human drink for serious conversations." Kira accepted cautiously, inhaling the unfamiliar aroma. "Have we been having frivolous ones until now?" That earned a low chuckle. Security sweep picked up transport signatures 15 kilometers south. Military grade, moving in search patterns. His expression grew somber. "Thought you should know." The fear she expected didn't materialize. Instead, a calm determination settled over her. "We should prepare Ilara for whatever comes." "Already started," Thomas admitted. "Been teaching her the root cellar hiding spot. Showed her how to use the emergency beacon if things go sideways." He met her gaze directly. "I've also been working on a contingency. Property has an old mining tunnel, connects to a ravine system outside scanner range." "You've thought of everything," Kira murmured, touched by his thoroughness. "Force of habit. 8 years of worst-case scenario planning doesn't fade easily." He took a sip of his whiskey. "Though I find myself hoping this particular scenario doesn't play out." The admission hung between them, laden with implications neither had voiced. "I should be terrified." Kira said softly. Yet I feel anchored here. Her eyes met his. With you. Something shifted in Thomas's expression, a guardedness giving way to vulnerability. Been trying to maintain appropriate distance, professional boundaries. His voice dropped lower, not doing a very good job of it. Perhaps boundaries between our people are already more permeable than either government acknowledges. The whiskey forgotten, Thomas reached across the space between them, his fingers gently tracing the silvery ridges along her hairline. Kira closed her eyes at the touch, a sensation both foreign and achingly right. Your customs have rules for this, he asked, voice rough with restrained emotion. Many. All irrelevant now. She leaned into his touch, and yours. Just one. Both people need to want it. When their lips met, the differences between their species seemed insignificant compared to the sameness of their desire. His mouth was warmer than a Viridian's would be, his heartbeat faster beneath her palm. But the hunger was familiar, a language that required no translation. They moved to his bedroom by unspoken agreement, hands learning the topography of each other's bodies. Kira marveled at the heat that radiated from his skin, so different from the cool efficiency of Viridian physiology. Thomas explored the subtle luminescence that appeared along her spine when aroused, a biological response she had never had reason to explain to an outsider. Beautiful, he whispered against her neck, and the simple word held more genuine appreciation than all the formal poetry of Viridian courtship. Their joining was neither Viridian nor human, but something new, an improvised harmony of contrasting rhythms finding unexpected resonance. Afterward, lying in the tangle of sheets with her head on his chest, Kira felt the last vestiges of her formal self dissolve like morning mist. I didn't expect this, she admitted, tracing patterns on his skin. When we fled, I thought only of survival. Thomas's fingers combed through her hair, careful around the sensitive areas where her crest was forming. Life has a way of offering more than mere survival, if you let it. In the days that followed, their connection deepened, visible in 1,000 small ways. The casual intimacy of shared spaces, the silent communication of glances across the room. The way Ilara began to include Thomas in her stories about the future. They were creating something unprecedented, a family that existed outside the boundaries of either culture. But as the search patterns grew closer and more frequent, Kira knew their fragile new reality balanced on a knife's edge. One evening, as storm clouds gathered on the horizon, Thomas pulled her close at the edge of the field. Whatever comes, he said, his voice a promise, we face it together. Kira nodded, her decision already made. This human had shown her a different kind of strength, not the unyielding rigidity of Viridian tradition, but the supple resilience of a tree that bent with the wind without breaking. Together, she agreed, as the first raindrops began to fall. The warning came at dawn, a series of rapid beeps from the perimeter sensors Thomas had installed weeks earlier. They were out of bed instantly, moving with the coordinated efficiency of people who had rehearsed this moment many times. 5 vehicles, Thomas reported, scanning the security display. 3 military transports, 2 scout units. Coming up the eastern approach. Kira nodded, already pulling on practical clothing. Ilara. Getting her now. He paused at the doorway, his expression intense. Remember the plan. If things go south. The mining tunnel. I remember. She caught his hand. But I'm tired of running, Thomas. Something fierce and proud flashed in his eyes. He pulled her close for a brief, fierce kiss before they separated to their assigned tasks. Ilara was already awake when Kira entered her room, wide-eyed but composed as she packed the emergency bag they'd prepared. Is it Commander Dravik? She asked, her voice steady despite the fear Kira could sense beneath it. Most likely. Kira helped her daughter into a jacket, checking that the small locator beacon was securely fastened inside the lining. But remember what we discussed. Your safety comes first. If Thomas signals, you go to the cellar immediately. Outside, the rumble of approaching vehicles grew louder. Through the window, Kiera could see dust clouds rising along the access road that connected Thomas's property to the main settlement. Thomas met them in the kitchen, his old military sidearm holstered at his hip. A last resort they hoped wouldn't be necessary. They're slowing at the boundary marker. Formal approach. Kiera nodded, unsurprised. Dravik would observe protocols on human territory, even while violating the spirit of border agreements. The three of them moved to the porch, presenting a united front as the vehicles came to a stop in the yard. The lead transport's hatch opened to reveal exactly who Kiera had expected. Commander Dravik himself, flanked by 4 warriors in ceremonial combat armor. Dravik's crest was fully extended in a display of dominance, the dark purple ridges seeming to absorb rather than reflect the morning sunlight. His eyes fixed on Kiera with a possessiveness that made her skin crawl. Matriarch Talavir, he called, using her formal title. You have led us on quite a pursuit. I am no longer Matriarch of House Talavir, Kiera replied, her voice carrying across the yard. I renounced my title when I rejected our arrangement. Dravik's expression hardened. The Council does not recognize your renunciation. The alliance treaties have been signed. You are my bondmate under Viridian law. Your laws end at the border. Thomas interjected, his stance subtly shifting to protective positioning. Dravik's gaze slid to the human, dismissive yet calculating. This matter does not concern you, Terran. This is an internal Viridian affair. It became my concern when you brought armed forces onto my property. Thomas's voice remained calm but carried an unmistakable edge of authority. And when you pursued a woman who clearly doesn't want your attention. Ilara, standing between them, straightened her spine in perfect mimicry of her mother's posture. My mother isn't going with you, she stated with the clear conviction of youth. We live here now. A murmur ran through the warriors behind Dravik. Kiera recognized several faces, younger sons of noble houses, assigned to Dravik's command as political gestures. Their expressions revealed uncertainty rather than the blind loyalty Dravik might have expected. Child, Dravik said, his tone softening artificially, your mother has responsibilities to her bloodline and to Viridia. This diversion cannot continue. This is not a diversion, Dravik. Kiera stepped forward, placing herself slightly ahead of Thomas and Ilara. This is a choice. One I was never permitted to make until I took it for myself. Dravik's face darkened. Choice is a luxury incompatible with noble duty. He gestured to his warriors. Secure the matriarch and her offspring. We depart immediately. The warriors hesitated, and in that moment of indecision, Thomas spoke again. Before your men take another step, they should know 2 things. His voice carried the weight of experience. First, this property sits under the jurisdiction of the Frontier Settlement Act, which grants me legal authority to defend it against unauthorized military incursion. He paused, making eye contact with several of the younger warriors. Second, the emergency beacon was activated the moment you crossed my boundary line. Right now, human settlement defense forces are en route. I estimate arrival in under 15 minutes. Kiera concealed her surprise. They had discussed this contingency, but she hadn't realized Thomas had already initiated it. Dravik snarled, You risk interplanetary incident over a domestic matter. You created the incident when you brought armed forces across the border, Thomas countered. But there's a simple solution that avoids diplomatic fallout. And what would that be, human? Formal asylum, Kiera interjected, seizing the moment. Under Section 12 of the Viridian Human Accords, any Viridian may request asylum if they can demonstrate legitimate fear of persecution. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Dravik's face. The Accords were the foundation of the fragile peace between their peoples. Violating them would have consequences far beyond his personal ambitions. You have no grounds for asylum, he insisted, but his tone had lost conviction. I have documentation of your actions on Proxima, Kiera said calmly, transferred to secure servers before I left. Actions the Council conveniently ignored in their eagerness for alliance. This was partially a bluff. She had seen the reports, but hadn't had time to secure copies. But Dravik's momentary expression of alarm told her the truth of her accusations. One of the younger warriors stepped forward. "Commander, if such documentation exists." Silence. Dravik snapped, but the damage was done. The seeds of doubt had been planted among his followers. The distant sound of approaching aircraft drew everyone's attention skyward. Thomas kept his expression neutral, but Kiera could sense his relief. The settlement forces were indeed responding. "Your choices are narrowing, Commander," Thomas observed. "But I'm a reasonable man. How about this? You withdraw your forces now, return to Viridian territory, and file a formal diplomatic petition for discussion of Kiera's status. Through proper channels." Dravik's crest pulsed with barely contained rage. "You dare dictate terms to me?" "Not dictating. Offering a path that preserves your honor and prevents bloodshed." Thomas's voice remained steady. "Because I promise you, Kiera and Ilara are not leaving this property against their will while I draw breath." The human aircraft appeared on the horizon, their distinctive silhouettes unmistakable. Dravik assessed the situation with the calculation of a career military officer and evidently found the odds unacceptable. "This matter is not concluded," he warned, but already he was signaling his warriors to withdraw. "The Council will hear of this interference." "I'm counting on it," Kiera replied. "Perhaps they should also hear of your unauthorized border crossing and attempted abduction on human territory." As the Viridian vehicles retreated, Kiera felt Ilara's hand slip into hers, squeezing tightly. The three of them remained on the porch until the dust clouds disappeared from view. Only then did Thomas release a long breath, his shoulders relaxing incrementally. "They'll be back," he said, holstering his weapon. "With paperwork and diplomats next time." "Yes," Kiera agreed. "But that gives us time. Time to formally request asylum, to document our case." The settlement security forces landed in the field, and Thomas went to meet them, explaining the situation with the practiced efficiency of someone accustomed to military debriefings. Ilara looked up at her mother, her expression serious. "Are we still in danger?" Kiera considered the question carefully. "Yes," she finally answered. "But not alone anymore. And sometimes that makes all the difference." Later that night, after the security forces had departed with promises of increased patrols, after Ilara had finally succumbed to exhaustion, Kiera found Thomas on the porch. He had been uncharacteristically quiet since the confrontation. "Second thoughts?" she asked softly, joining him on the bench that had become their place for evening conversations. "No," he said immediately, reaching for her hand. "Just realizing how much has changed. 4 weeks ago, this was just a quiet farm. Now it's the center of a potential diplomatic incident." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "Don't regret it for a second, though." "When I fled, I only thought about what I was running from," Kiera admitted. "I never imagined what I might be running toward." Thomas pulled her close, his warmth a shield against the night chill. "What happens now is your choice, Kiera. Always will be." She leaned into him, finally understanding that true strength wasn't found in rigid tradition or enforced duty, but in the courage to choose one's own path. Her daughter was safe. She had found unexpected love on a strange world. And for the first time in her life, her future belonged to her alone. "I choose this," she said simply. "You, us, whatever challenges come with it." Above them, the twin moons of Nexus cast their silver light across the fields that had become her sanctuary and her home. In the distance, the border that separated their worlds seemed increasingly insignificant, a line drawn on maps, but meaningless to hearts that had found their own territory. "Us," Thomas agreed, sealing the promise with a kiss that tasted of belonging. "Whatever comes next."